In a quiet house in Coatbridge, Scotland, a man and woman are asleep. The silence is shattered by the splintery crash of their front door. Armed men storm their bedroom. They are carrying machetes and swords. What unfolds next is an act of brutal, calculated punishment. It is a message written in blood from a powerful crime clan. Why was this man targeted for such savage attack? And how did a horrifying 7-week campaign of terror end with a toddler being taught how to shoot a man? To help us continue making sure these stories are heard, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it.
The world of organized crime operates on a strict, unspoken code. Loyalty is the highest currency, and betrayal is a debt paid in pain. James Sheridan knew the rules. For a time, he had thrived by them, working as a member of a formidable Scottish crime gang known as the Daniel Clan. But inside the cold, grey walls of a prison cell, clarity can be a harsh and sudden visitor. Sheridan was serving an 18-month sentence after being caught with cannabis and a staggering £104,000 in illicit cash. Behind bars, with the noise of his old life finally silenced, he made a decision. He was done. He wanted out. For the gang's leadership, this was not a resignation, it was an act of defiance. The boss, still furious over the loss of the drugs and the significant sum of money, placed the blame squarely on Sheridan. An instruction was issued from the top of the criminal hierarchy, cold and simple. James Sheridan was to be assaulted. Retribution was scheduled in advance. On Tuesday, May 16, 2023, the gates of His Majesty's Prison Low Morse, near Bishopbriggs, opened for Sheridan. He was granted early release, but his freedom was an illusion. Waiting for him were two men, one of whom was a 42-year-old named Anthony Redpath. Their job was to follow him, to track his every move. Sheridan made his way to a property in the town of Coatbridge, Lanarkshire, and Redpath's associate soon departed, leaving Redpath to conduct the surveillance alone. For hours, he kept watch, his presence a silent promise of the violence to come. In one 30-minute period, his phone rang 4 times. It was the gang boss, wanting updates, coordinating the attack. Redpath knew a man was going to be assaulted. He just didn't know how severely. Later that day, the pieces moved into place. Ross Algailoni, a 36-year-old enforcer for the clan, met with at least 3 other gang members in the affluent Glasgow suburb of Bearsden. Algailoni was an unlikely figure for such a brutal role. A trained mechanic with a family and a limited criminal history, he had somehow become the clan's go-to instrument for inflicting terror. The men finalized their plan and drove to Coatbridge. Inside the house, James Sheridan was with his partner, Samantha Cook. The quiet of their evening was obliterated in an instant. The front door splintered and flew open as Algailoni and his crew booted their way inside. They stormed into the bedroom, brandishing weapons described as machetes and swords. There was no negotiation, no warning. There was only carnage. The men set upon Sheridan, hacking at him with a savagery meant to send a clear message. They slashed at his head, his arms, and his legs. Samantha Cook, caught in the crossfire, was also viciously attacked. When the enforcers were satisfied that the message had been delivered, they fled, leaving behind a bloodbath. Lying on the floor, bleeding and grievously wounded, Samantha Cook found the strength to dial 999. At around 2:30 in the morning on May 17th, police officers arrived at Beechwood Drive. They were met with a scene of shocking violence. Sheridan's injuries were catastrophic. Medics rushed him to the hospital, fearing he would not survive the night. His right leg was too damaged to be saved and had to be amputated above the knee. 2 of his fingers were also severed. Samantha Cook required extensive surgery for her own injuries. 2 fingers on her right hand had been sliced off. Doctors attempted to reattach them, but the damage was too severe, and they too had to be amputated. Despite the life-altering attack, Sheridan's spirit of defiance remained unbroken. Shortly after the incident, a video clip began to circulate on social media. In it, a heavily bandaged James Sheridan is seen in his hospital room, dancing by his bed. He looks into the camera and taunts his attackers, shouting, "Take the fingers, take the leg, but you will not take my life, you f***." For Sheridan and Cook, the shared trauma was too much for their relationship to bear, and they later separated. The Daniel clan had made their point, and their enforcer, Ross Algailoni, was just getting started. His campaign of violence, which would later be described as 7 weeks of mayhem, was far from over. The next target was a 39-year-old man named Scott McCrann. He owed the Daniel clan £19,000 from a gambling debt, and Al Gaylani was sent to collect. On Wednesday, June 14th, Al Gaylani picked McCrann up, driving him to a house on Stewart Street in Wishaw. The property had been prepared. It was to be a private torture chamber. As soon as the door closed, McCrann was ordered to strip down to his boxer shorts. His hands and legs were bound together, leaving him completely helpless. For the next 2 days, Al Gaylani subjected him to a relentless and sadistic ordeal. He used a baseball bat to beat McCrann repeatedly, striking him so many times that McCrann later estimated he had been hit over 100 times. The physical violence was punctuated by acts of extreme cruelty. Al Gaylani forced McCrann to place his hand flat on a cooker, then took out a machete and struck his hand 3 or 4 times, splitting skin and bone. Someone else was present during this attack, filming the horror as it unfolded. To increase the pressure, Al Gaylani called McCrann's relatives, demanding they pay the £19,000 debt if they wanted to see him alive again. After 2 days of unimaginable suffering, McCrann was released. But his nightmare was not over. About a week later, on Sunday, June 25th, Al Gaylani summoned him again. McCrann was driven back to the same house in Wishaw, back to the room where he had been systematically brutalized. He was once again ordered to strip. The following day, the psychological terror escalated to an almost unbelievable level. Al Gaylani's partner, a 39-year-old woman named Elaine Curry, arrived at the house. She had a 2-year-old girl in her care, Al Gaylani's own daughter. With Curry present, Al Gaylani renewed his assault on McCrann. He shot him around 20 times with a powerful air pistol, the pellets tearing into his skin. He beat him again with a baseball bat and punched him mercilessly. Al Gaylani recorded this second attack on his own mobile phone, documenting his depravity. Then, in an act of profound corruption, he involved his own child. He placed his 2-year-old daughter on his knee and handed her the air pistol. He coached the toddler, telling her to shout, "Put them up." The little girl complied. He then instructed her to shoot Scott McCrann. She pulled the trigger twice, firing pellets into the bound man's backside. Elaine Curry filmed this specific moment. The footage captured what happened next. Al Gaylani, Curry, and the little girl all cheered. An adult voice is then heard shouting, "Put your guns up." McCrann's ordeal finally ended when he promised his tormentor that he would come up with a plan to make money for the gang. He escaped, but the physical and psychological scars would be permanent. He required surgery to remove the numerous pellets embedded in his body and to repair the severe damage to his hand. The 7 weeks of mayhem reached a final, terrifying peak on Tuesday, July 4th. This time, the victim appeared to be chosen at random. At around 1 o'clock in the morning, Al Gaylani travelled to Helensburgh, a seaside town in Argyll and Bute. He entered a home on Hood Court through an unlocked door. Inside, he found a 19-year-old woman, a complete stranger. Al Gaylani was wearing an orange high-visibility jacket with the hood pulled up to conceal his face. He was armed with a police-style baton. He cornered the young woman in her kitchen and, without a word, struck her twice with the weapon as she raised her hands to defend herself. The attack was sudden, brutal, and utterly senseless. The only thing that stopped him was the woman's dog, which lunged at Al Gaylani and began biting his leg, forcing him to flee into the night. The young woman was left with significant and lasting tendon damage to her left hand. The reason for this final, brutal act remains a mystery. The sheer violence of Al Gaylani's rampage sent shockwaves through the community and prompted a major police investigation. On July 6th, authorities arrested Anthony Redpath, the lookout. During questioning, he made a strange admission, stating, "I was there for the other side to watch him and keep him safe." But the investigation took an even stranger turn the very next day. On July 7th, police arrested 2 men in connection with the attempted murder of James Sheridan. One was Tony Redpath. The other was Scott McCrann, the man who had been tortured by Al Gaylani. The attempted murder charges against McCrann were eventually dropped. The reasons for his initial arrest never made public. In August 2023, the net finally closed around the primary culprits. Police arrested Ross Al Gaylani and Elaine Curry. The 2-year-old girl, who had been used as a pawn in their sadistic games, was taken from the home and placed into care. The subsequent court cases unravelled the full extent of the horror. Anthony Redpath pleaded guilty to conspiracy to assault and was sentenced by Lord Arthurson to 4 years in prison. Elaine Curry pleaded guilty to the charge of abducting Scott McCrann. Her defense lawyer argued that she had been in an abusive relationship with Al Gaylani and mentioned her history of cancer treatment and a current pregnancy as mitigating factors. Judge Lord fairly described her actions as colossal stupidity, but, citing exceptional circumstances, chose to admonish her. She was left with a criminal record, but no prison time. The main architect of the violence, Ross Algailani, faced a mountain of evidence. He pleaded guilty to the attempted murder of James Sheridan and the severe assaults on Samantha Cook, Scott McCrann, and the 19-year-old woman in Helensburgh. His own lawyer, Brian McConaughey, could only describe his client's actions as 7 weeks of mayhem, comparing the evidence to watching a horror film. In court, it was stated that Algailani found it difficult to come to terms with the fact that he was responsible for such offences. But Judge Lady Stacy was unmoved. She looked at the trained mechanic and family man who had become a monster and delivered her verdict. Branding his actions cruel, cowardly, and sadistic, she sentenced him to 16 years in prison, a sentence reduced from a potential 18 years because of his guilty pleas. Upon his release, he will be subject to an additional 3 years of supervision. The man who enforced the gang's brutal code with machetes, bats, and an air pistol in the hands of a child was finally held accountable for the terror he had unleashed.
When a case involves such extreme and calculated brutality, it is natural to ask how a person, especially a trained mechanic with a family, could become a monster. Research from scholars R. McLean, J. Densley, and R. Dukar offers a window into the dark world of criminal enforcers. In their study, Who Are the Enforcers?, they interviewed individuals who have worked as a muscle for organized crime groups in West Scotland and other areas. They found that pathways into this role often begin not with hardened killers, but with ordinary offenders. People with existing social ties to a criminal group and a reputation for being reliable are presented with opportunities. A simple data collection job can escalate and the reputation for violence can grow. The researchers also place enforcement on a spectrum. It can range from simple monitoring and threats all the way to severe assaults and contract killings. Violence is almost always instrumental, meaning it serves a purpose: to extract money, to enforce loyalty, or to send a terrifying message to rivals. This often involves careful coordination, including the use of lookouts and detailed instructions from gang leaders who want to insulate themselves from the act itself. The case of Ross Algailani appears to be a chilling illustration of these academic findings. His role as an enforcer began with coordinated surveillance on James Sheridan, an act of punishment ordered from a distance by the clan's leadership. His violence then moved along the spectrum from the brutal group assaults on Sheridan and Samantha Cook to the systematic torture of Scott McCrann to collect the dates. Each act was a calculated step designed to enforce the gang's code and solidify its reputation for ruthless control. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.